1,000 days of training to develop. 10,000 days of training to polish. In this video, I would like to dive into Miyamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings, also known as Gorin no Sho. I'd first like to give a brief overview of Musashi's life, then take a look at the 5 chapters that make up the Book of Five Rings and their key lessons. Though there is very little to confirm Musashi's year and place of birth, most historians agree that he was born in 1584, either in a province named Harima or the village of Miyamoto in Mimasaka. Musashi himself states in the Book of Five Rings that he was born in Harima, but there is also evidence that suggests he was actually born in Miyamoto in Mimasaka. His father, Shinmen Munisai, was an accomplished martial artist and said to be a master of the jite. Musashi mentions in the Book of Five Rings that he had his first sword match at the age of 13, and in the following years Musashi traveled from province to province, encountered various martial artists from various schools, but never lost a single match. Fast forward several years, and in 1643 Musashi departed for Mount Iwato and started living in the Reigando cave. And this is where he started to compose the Book of Five Rings. In 1645, Musashi completed the Book of Five Rings and dedicated it to his disciple named Terao Magonojo. Musashi, being a wise man, sensed himself approaching his death and wrote farewell letters to several people and gave away most of his possessions as well this year. During the final days of his life, he wrote his final work, the Dokkodo, which in a way is Musashi's 21 rules for life. I may make a short video on that work as well. The Book of Five Rings consists of 5 scrolls: the scroll of earth, water, fire, wind, and heaven. These scrolls are sometimes translated as books or chapters, but since they were written on actual scrolls, I will be using that term in this video. The work offers many philosophical insights that can be applied to business, sports, various arts, and just life in general. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The Scroll of Earth, sometimes translated as the Scroll of Ground, serves as the foundation for the preceding scrolls, and that is why he gave the name Earth to this first scroll. In this scroll, he provides a brief overview of his life as a warrior, then talks about what he hopes to show in each of the scrolls. One big concept Musashi instills is to know 10,000 things from a single thing. Musashi tells us that if we stay on a single path and study a single discipline very deeply, we will later be able to apply our knowledge and experience to other fields and aspects of life. On the flip side, we can go deeper in our passion and crafts by making ourselves familiar to various arts and fields. We are often told by business gurus to go deep, not wide. While this adage has its merits, Musashi advocates for a slightly different perspective: go deep, then wide. Musashi then mentions the importance of knowing the advantages of all your weapons. Every weapon will have its strengths and weaknesses, and the weapon of choice will be completely different depending on the given situation. You should not have a predilection for certain weapons. Putting too much emphasis on one weapon results in not having enough of the others. Weapons should be adapted to your personal qualities and be ones you can handle. It is useless to imitate others, for a general as for a soldier. It is negative to have marked preferences. So Musashi is telling us that we shouldn't over-depend on one resource for success. Make sure we are familiar when one is appropriate over the other, depending on the occasion. Also take into consideration that certain resources and tools may suit us better than others, and just because it works well for others, that will not necessarily be the case for us. We must all examine our resources and tools carefully to know the pros and cons of each one. Musashi also points out the importance of cadence and rhythm. Ultimately, he is talking about the significance of timing. In the way of business, there are cadences for making a fortune and cadences for losing it. In each way, there exist different cadences. You must discern well the cadences in conformity with which things prosper, and those in conformity with which things decline. So it's not necessarily about working and moving fast or slow, but more about understanding how critical timing is. Finally, Musashi ends the Scroll of Earth with 9 principles to guide our training. Think of that which is not evil. Train in the way. Take an interest in all the arts. Know the way of all professions. Know how to appreciate the advantages and disadvantages of each thing. Learn to judge the quality of each thing. Perceive and understand that which is not visible from the outside. Be attentive even to minimal things. Do not perform useless acts. Some of these principles will return later as we explore the remaining scrolls. So here is a quick review of the big takeaways from the Scroll of Earth. 1. Go deep in order to go wide. Understand 10,000 things from one thing. 2. Know all your weapons and their advantages. And 3. Timing is everything. Scroll of Water. Instead of imitating what I write, make this text yours, like a principle that you have brought forth from your own thoughts. It is necessary to ponder well by putting yourself into the situation. Those are the final lines of the opening section of this scroll. The Scroll of Water talks primarily about the state of mind that we need to train in Musashi's way. Musashi claims that it is necessary to keep the mind pure and broad like water, and wisdom will find its place within this scope. He demands that our minds be centered at all times. Even in a state of inaction, our minds cannot be idle, and in a state of rapid actions, our minds cannot descend to chaos. The mind must not be carried along by the body, nor the body by the mind. The mind must remain centered even in moments of drastic change. Musashi goes into greater detail, stating, "Those who are small must know well those who are large, and those who are large must know those who are small. The large as well as small must keep their mind straight and not overestimate themselves." In addition to not overestimating ourselves, we must keep our mind centered to not underestimate either side. Musashi then touches upon the idea of how to use our eyes, which is one of the biggest topics in his work. Musashi claims that there is the eye of observation or perceiving, and the eye of looking or seeing. The eye of observation must be strong and powerful, while the eye of looking to be weak and gentle. Depending on the translation of the work, these two eyes will be translated differently, so let's take a quick look at the origins. In the original text, Musashi describes them with 2 different characters, kan and ken, which both mean to see or look, but differ slightly. The one on the left, kan, translates to observe or perceive. It also means to look, but in a very observant, introspective way. The one on the right is more commonly used to mean to see. The thing that makes this confusing is that when both characters are used as verbs, they are both pronounced miru, so they happen to be homonyms. So Japanese scholars even translate these two as the kan eye and ken eye to distinguish the difference. Aside from this interesting language trivia, recognizing the difference between deeply observing something and just seeing it is critical in Musashi's philosophy. Musashi continues his thoughts on the way of gazing by stating, "It is necessary to look at what is distant as something that is close, and what is close as something that is distant. This is essential for strategy." He is urging us to be fully aware of what is in front of us, but to never lose sight of the larger goal. Being aware of the small details, but not to the extent where we are distracted by them and end up taking our eyes off the bigger picture. We must think in both short-term and long-term. Towards the very end of the Scroll of Water, Musashi instructs us to follow a road that is 1,000 leagues long, one step at a time. Be without haste and be convinced that all these practices are the duty of a warrior. Be victorious today over what you were yesterday. Tomorrow, be victorious over your clumsiness and then also over your skill. We often hear that journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, which is originally from section 64 of Tao Te Ching. And this is exactly what Musashi is talking about, how we must all walk down the right path and be patient with our progress. The last line of the quote still remains very relevant today. Our biggest enemy is sometimes ourselves from the recent past, and we must focus on defeating them first. As a wise man once said, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. So here is a review of the big takeaways from Scroll of Water. 1. Do not overestimate or underestimate anything, including ourselves. 2. Observe powerfully and see gently. Be aware of both the big picture and the details. And finally, 3. Be victorious today over what you were yesterday. Then repeat. Scroll of Fire. The Scroll of Fire talks about combat and battle strategies and techniques, but a lot of the wisdom behind it can be applied to our personal life and struggles. In the very first section, titled Regarding the Place of Combat, Musashi talks about how one must thoroughly take into account the place of combat if they are to win the battle. He instructs the reader that one should always choose a place best suited for victory. He says we need to take various elements into consideration, such as the position of the sun, where the walls are in relation to one and their enemy, how much space is on the left side and right side, and also suggests to position ourselves at a higher ground than the enemy. Taking note of these small details of a certain space can determine the outcome of the battle. Musashi claims there are 3 different types of taking initiatives in combat. 1. Initiative of attack, Ken-no-sen. 2. Initiative of waiting, Tai-no-sen. And 3. Body-body initiative, Tai-tai-no-sen. The first one is where one initiates the attack first to gain control of the situation. The second one is where one feigns weakness, let the opponent attack first, but strikes back with great force to stun them and take over the battle. And the third one is where one and their opponent attack at the same time. Regarding this third one, Musashi writes, "As your opponent attacks quickly, you advance calmly but with strength. And as he approaches, your entire being quickly becomes resolved. When you see him waver, take the victory directly and with strength." Again, when your opponent attacks calmly, you attack a little more quickly, but with light and almost floating movements. When he approaches, complicate the movement a little, follow his expression, and vigorously take the victory. There are only these 3 ways of taking initiative. The important thing to understand here is that regardless of the situation we find ourselves in, we can and we must take full control of the situation if we are to come out of it victorious. In addition to understanding your surroundings and how to take charge, Musashi goes on to mention how we must study and know our opponents very well, which he calls becoming your opponent. Going back to the ideas in the Scroll of Water, knowing our enemy thoroughly will prevent us from both overestimating or underestimating our foes. The more you know your enemy, the higher chance of us securing victory. Musashi also understood the importance of changing strategies during battles. He states that we could try the same tactic twice, but not 3 times, as we should switch to a new tactic after the second try. He calls this idea change from the mountain to the sea. If the mountain is not working, change the sea. If the sea is not working, change to the mountain. Musashi states, you can do the same thing twice, but not 3 times. If you fail with a technique, you can begin it over again once more. But if you do not succeed this time, abruptly apply another, completely different technique. In this way, if your opponent is thinking of the mountain, you apply the sea. If he is thinking of the sea, you apply the mountain. Such is the way of strategy. One of the biggest ideas from the Scroll of Fire is recognizing the instant of collapse. Musashi explains that collapse is common to all things. The collapse of a house, the collapse of a body, the collapse of your opponent. All of them, according to the moment, are collapses from a discordance of rhythm. With everything in life and nature, our enemies will have a moment where they collapse, both big and small, but it will not last long. We cannot miss this window of opportunity if we want to come out on top. During the combat, your opponent begins to collapse as a result of a discordance in cadence. But if you slack off at this moment, you will give him an opportunity to re-establish himself, and you will lose a chance to defeat him. As mentioned in the Scroll of Earth, timing is crucial. When opportunity presents itself, we must seize the moment. So here's a quick review of the big takeaways from Scroll of Fire. 1. Design your environment for success. 2. Take control of the situation, regardless of how the battle starts. 3. Pivot your methods and change your game plan if things aren't working. And 4. Recognize the instant of collapse and do not miss opportunities. Scroll of Wind. The Scroll of Wind is a relatively short section compared to the previous scrolls, and here Musashi looks at several other martial arts schools and teachings. He stresses the importance of learning about other schools, as he says, you cannot know with certainty the way of your own school without knowing the way of others. He claims that by learning the way and lives of others, we can observe our own way with a broad, ample mind. Musashi looks at the main characteristics of the various schools. There are ones that focus on the size of the weapons. Some claim that speed is everything. Some schools focus all their time and energy in mastering their footwork, and some schools spend all their time on small details. All these schools were convinced that their strategy was the best, and only their strategy could lead them to victory. Musashi largely criticized all of these various schools for this very reason. For example, regarding the schools that emphasized large weapons, Musashi states, instead of relying on the principle of strategy, they try to win by means of length and situating themselves far away from their opponent. This approach comes from mental weakness. It is in this sense that I consider their strategies to be weak. And regarding schools that have a large number of techniques, Musashi says, teaching people a large number of sword techniques is turning the way into a business of selling goods, making beginners believe that there is something profound in their training by impressing them with a variety of techniques. This attitude towards strategy must be avoided, because thinking that there is a variety of ways of cutting a man down is evidence of a disturbed mind. Musashi believed that these kinds of preconceptions can prevent us from finding the optimal way to win in a given situation, which will be different every time. He found that preconceptions and biases make us very inflexible, doing ourselves a disservice. And as seen in the last example, Musashi was strictly against individuals being absorbed by fancy techniques and minuscule details. Instead, he insisted on solidifying the basics and focusing on the ultimate goal. So here is a review of the big takeaways from Scroll of Wind. 1. Do not get caught up in trivial details. Never lose sight of the ultimate purpose and goal. 2. Do not get caught up in fancy techniques. Solidify the basics and be flexible. 3. Get rid of preconceptions and biases, as they get in the way. Scroll of Heaven. This final scroll is by far the shortest one out of the 5, and serves as an epilogue of the entire work. The word translated as heaven here is ku, which literally means sky, and this final scroll is sometimes translated as the scroll of emptiness, or the scroll of void, since the concept of emptiness is the sole focus here. Musashi states, emptiness, of course, is nothingness, knowing that which does not exist, while knowing that which exists. That is emptiness. The concept of emptiness is quite prominent in Eastern philosophy, but rather esoteric in nature. Musashi further explains that true emptiness is where the clouds of uncertainty have completely dissipated after years of training, after years and years of polishing your mind and will, and sharpening the 2 visions that we discussed in the Scroll of Water. Only then can we find true emptiness. Musashi is trying to teach us that emptiness is this notion of enlightenment and freedom that we can only achieve after we have dedicated many years to a single discipline, in a very deep and honest manner. In today's world, full of choices and options, it's not always easy to choose a single path and fully commit to it year after year. Struggles and adversities will inevitably get in the way. We might even go through an overwhelming amount of pain and hell at some point. We might also fear that we are missing out on opportunities by not pursuing multiple paths at once. But Musashi's words and life are telling us that pursuing one path deeply and honestly will unlock numerous possibilities within us, and also that discipline will ultimately lead us to a new sense of clarity and freedom, which he calls emptiness. Know this state of mind and take as fundamental that which is straight. Conceive of the way with a sincere mind. Practice strategy broadly. Think of a large scale with accuracy and clarity. Think of emptiness as the way, and see the way as emptiness. In emptiness, the good exists, and evil does not exist. Wisdom exists. Principle exists. The way exists. And the mind is emptiness. Thank you for watching.